He slid a $15,000 check across my kitchen table and said, "Start over somewhere smaller." I'm Margaret. I spent 40 years building that ranch, and in one signature, my own son tried to erase me. Would you call that betrayal? Or just business? Tell me what you think. I'm still figuring it out myself. Julian slid a check across my kitchen table like he was handing me the key to freedom. His lips curled into that familiar smirk, the one he'd practiced since high school debate club. The number printed in crisp black ink, $15,000, sat there between us, small as a joke. I stared at it, not touching, though the edges fluttered in the faint breeze from the ceiling fan overhead. Cicadas screamed outside as if they, too, had something to say. The check might as well have been a tombstone for 40 years of labor, sweat, and dust. The ranch ledger was still on the shelf, its leather spine warped from decades of summers. Every season, I wrote in it with a steady hand: calves born, hay purchased, drought losses. Even the times I'd borrowed against my life insurance to keep us afloat. That book carried the truth of my life more than any deed in the courthouse. Julian glanced at it once and called it old-fashioned accounting. He never understood that the ink held more than numbers. It held every dawn I rose before the rooster. "Mom," Julian said, sliding the check closer. "It's done. $4 million is a fair price for that land. You don't need the hassle anymore. This," he tapped the rectangle, "is your piece. Enough to get you set up in an apartment, maybe a condo closer to Owen if you want." I heard Owen's voice in my head from a week ago. "Watch Julian. He's been sniffing around county offices. Something doesn't smell right." My younger son always spoke softly, but urgency had cracked through that day. I'd brushed it off then, but now his warning rang as clear as the cicadas. Julian leaned back, straightening his blazer as though the kitchen table were a boardroom. "This way, you can relax. No more broken fences. No more worrying about feed. You've done enough." He paused, then lowered his voice, mock gentle. "You're not young anymore, Mom. I know it's hard to admit, but sometimes you forget things. This protects you." That word, forget, cut deeper than the dollar amount. I remembered last week calling the feed supplier myself, scheduling the hay cutting, checking water levels in the back pasture. My handwriting filled every square in the ledger. Senile? I wanted to laugh. Instead, I looked at his shoes. Italian leather, polished. The kind not meant for dirt roads. His tie pin gleamed like it belonged to a banker, not the boy who once tracked mud through this very kitchen after chasing calves. $4 million, he repeated, and you walk away free. I already signed everything, no more stress. I didn't ask what he'd signed or how. I already suspected. Forged papers, rushed filings, his confidence built on my supposed frailty. I had seen this mask before, when he convinced his wife to refinance their house against my advice, when he bragged about his crypto bets that went south. He was a man who mistook recklessness for cleverness. 15,000, I said finally, my voice even. That's what 40 years is worth? Julian smiled as though I'd just agreed. Mom, you're missing the point. You won't need the ranch. You'll thank me later. I thought of the long summers branding cattle, of winters breaking ice with a sledgehammer so the herd could drink, of jars of pecans lined up on the pantry shelf like small trophies of survival. My husband had died young, but the ranch had remained my partner, my burden, and my pride. Every scar on my hands was written in that ledger. Julian reached for his coffee, sipped like a man closing a deal. He didn't notice my silence was its own kind of weapon. Inside, I measured his arrogance against my patience. Owen had told me to get a lawyer. Claire's name came to mind. Claire Ramirez, the attorney who helped a neighbor set up a trust last spring. I remembered her voice. The first rule is paper. Paper doesn't bleed, but it testifies. Julian leaned forward again. Mom, you should deposit that today. Don't let it sit. Things can get complicated with checks. Oh, I'll take care of it. I said softly. My fingers brushed the check at last, not to accept, but to capture its details. I folded it slowly, slipped it into the ledger between 2 pages marked Hay, July 1987, and Repairs, August 1993. Let him think I was sentimental. The cicadas outside grew louder, as though pressing for my reply. Julian stood, buttoning his blazer. This is better for everyone. You'll see. I rose too, steadying myself on the chipped counter. Maybe you're right, I murmured. But before I disappear into some apartment, why don't we have one last dinner together? My treat, old time's sake. His smirk widened, confident he had already won. Tomorrow night, then. I know a place. I smiled back, the same way I used to smile at a rattlesnake before reaching for the hoe. He thought I was surrendering. He didn't see the steel behind my calm. When the door shut behind him, I let out a long breath. I touched the ledger on the shelf, the check tucked inside. 40 years of sweat and ink would speak louder than his polished lies. Tomorrow night, I wouldn't be the one walking away empty-handed. Claire's office smelled like peppermint and printer toner. I stepped inside, clutching the leather purse where Julian's forged document sat, folded and burning a hole through the lining. She looked up from her desk, reading glasses low on her nose, and smiled like a woman who already knew the answer to the question I hadn't asked yet. Behind her, blinds filtered the August light into thin stripes across the room. You made it, she said, standing to greet me. Her hand was firm, but not cold. Claire Ramirez was the kind of woman who wore suits in soft earth tones and didn't waste syllables. I sat down in the chair across from her desk, the air conditioner humming steadily above. On her desk sat a blue binder, unmarked except for a slim white label. M. Langston, Trust. My stomach tightened. I came straight from the kitchen, I said, voice low. He was still finishing his coffee when I left. He thinks I'm cashing the check. She didn't blink. Then we're right on time. I reached into my bag, pulled out the manila envelope with Julian's copies of the deed transfer and sales agreement. He'd printed them on glossy paper, probably at some FedEx office, complete with a signature he must have lifted from an old birthday card. Claire leafed through the pages slowly, eyes scanning, pen tapping against the edge of her desk. This is bad, she muttered, more to herself than to me, but not irreversible. She reached for her keyboard and pulled up a window on the screen beside her. He filed this yesterday, she said, clicking through the Bexar County Recorder's site. But because we signed the irrevocable trust last week, and because it was notarized and time-stamped, his filing is invalid. She turned the screen toward me. See the sequence? Your trust was logged 36 hours before he walked into the clerk's office. I blinked at the digital records, at my name above the words grantor retains lifetime control. And he doesn't know? I asked. Claire smiled faintly. He'll find out soon enough, but we're going to choose when. She opened the blue binder and slid it toward me. Inside were neatly tabbed sections: asset list, trustees, revocation clause, blank. The ink from my signature hadn't even faded yet. Everything in this trust, she said, is shielded. He can file all the phony paperwork he wants, but unless he's planning to physically bulldoze the property, there's nothing he can touch. I ran my fingers over the binder's surface. It felt like armor. She opened another folder, thinner, with 2 sheets and a grainy screenshot. This came in from our IT consultant. Remember how you said you thought the buyer's name sounded fake? I nodded. Julian had mentioned a Javier Montenegro, someone supposedly interested in developing the ranch into a retreat center. The name had reeked of invention. Well, turns out the buyer doesn't exist. What does exist, she said, tapping the screenshot, is an email account created from an IP registered to Julian's business address. He sent inquiries to himself posing as Javier, even forwarded a fake wire transfer confirmation to the escrow office. My mouth went dry. We also pulled call logs, Claire continued. The bank flagged a $100 transfer used to create a dummy wire trail. It was just enough to ping their fraud filters. I sat back in the chair, hands limp in my lap. How do you stay calm reading all that? Claire's tone softened. Because it's evidence, not failure. And because we're not powerless. She clicked her mouse again, and a short audio clip began to play. Low quality, likely from someone's phone on speaker. Mom won't even notice. She signs things without reading. It's just dust to her now. Julian's voice, smooth, confident. That casual cruelty he thought passed for charm. I gripped the arms of the chair. Claire muted the clip. I'm sorry, she said, but you needed to hear it. It matters in court. I nodded slowly, words sticking in my throat. There was grief in me, but not for the land. For the boy I'd raised. The one who used to draw maps of the ranch on napkins, who once cried when we had to sell the old mare. I'd raised him, and now I had to prosecute him. Claire saw something in my face and gave me a moment. Then she sat straighter, voice tightening with purpose. Julian thinks he sold something he never owned, she said. The buyer was himself. That deal has no legal spine, and we have it all documented. Paper, audio, digital. It's airtight. The binder, the screenshot, the voice clip. I reached for the peppermint tea she'd poured without asking, steam curling upward like a signal. This stays with me, I whispered. This doesn't go to Owen. Not yet. Claire nodded. Of course, but I want you to think carefully about your next move. You said he invited you to dinner? I looked up, surprised. Yes, tomorrow. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Then maybe that's where we start. If he thinks you're folding, he won't be careful. I sipped the tea and felt something sharp melt on my tongue. Peppermint and strategy. Julian raised his glass like he was being honored, not investigated. To your new chapter, he said, grinning as if I should be grateful. The Summit grill glowed in warm amber light, and the $90 Cabernet he ordered stained the rim of his glass. The waiter smiled, unaware of the powder keg he was walking around. I tilted my head and returned the toast with a slight nod. The red wine tasted like tin to me. Outside, dusk painted San Antonio in gold and coral. Inside, the clinking of silverware and low jazz from the speakers tried to soften the edges. I'd worn my red dress, the one I hadn't touched in years, not for flair, but for armor. Julian didn't comment, but I saw his eyebrows rise, just for a beat. That was enough. Across the dining room, a young family gathered around a cake. Someone called for a group photo, and they all leaned in. For a flash of a second, I saw us there. Back when smiles were unpracticed, when Julian used to tug on my sleeve and ask if he could lick the frosting off the beaters. That boy was long gone. Julian leaned forward, cutting into his filet mignon. You'll love the condo listings I sent, he said. They've got elevators and indoor pools, much easier for you, and no lawn to mow. How thoughtful, I murmured, setting down my fork. My voice was calm, practiced. I'd been rehearsing for days. I mean, look at this place. He gestured with his knife around the room. We're not stuck in dusty barns anymore, Mom. This is the life. You've earned some rest. I smiled politely. You're quite the salesman. He didn't hear the weight behind my words. He rarely did. I actually met a broker yesterday, he continued. He said the buyer's firm is sending renovation teams next week. They're planning to flip the ranch into some kind of boutique retreat. He chuckled. Crazy how fast things move, huh? Wild, I said. He didn't notice my hands beneath the table, folded tight to keep from shaking. Not out of fear. I was past that. I was waiting for the door to open. When Claire arrived, she didn't stride in. She glided, crisp gray blazer, briefcase in hand, peppermint calm. Julian turned to see who'd joined us, and the air shifted the moment she extended her hand. Claire Ramirez, she said, her voice a clean blade. Margaret's legal counsel. Julian blinked. Excuse me? I gestured toward the empty seat beside me. She's joining us for dessert. Claire sat, opened her briefcase slowly, deliberately. We won't need long, she said. Julian's laugh was nervous. Mom, what is this? You'll want to hear her out. The waiter came to pour more wine. Julian waved him off, suddenly tense. Claire slid a folder across the table, the same motion Julian had used with the check. But this time, it wasn't an insult. It was a mirror. These are copies of the irrevocable trust, Claire began. Filed last week and legally binding. The ranch remains under Margaret's lifetime control. It cannot be sold, transferred, or signed away. Not without her express consent. Julian's face drained. That's not possible. I filed the deed myself. Claire opened the second folder. This is metadata from the county office. The filing came from an IP address linked to your business suite in Austin. The buyer listed, Javier Montenegro, was traced to an email you registered last spring. My son's mouth opened, then closed. He looked like a man finding out gravity just stopped working. We also have a voice clip, Claire continued, tapping her phone. You speaking with the buyer, yourself, saying, Mom won't even notice. He turned to me. You bugged me? No, I said. You underestimated me. Julian's hand twitched toward the folder, then stopped. Claire's eyes narrowed. You should know, she said evenly. Everything in this conversation is being documented. This device, she placed a small black recorder on the table, is active. I watched him swallow. For a man who'd been gloating over Wagyu beef 5 minutes earlier, he suddenly looked parched. This is insane, he sputtered. You can't just trap me in some restaurant and throw accusations around. Nobody's trapping you, Claire said, folding her hands. You're free to leave at any time, though I'd recommend you stay for the part about the federal wire fraud statute. I said nothing, just reached for my glass, let the moment breathe. The hush around our table was palpable. The family at the other side of the room had finished their cake and moved on, laughing, oblivious. I envied them, briefly. Then I heard the footsteps, slow, familiar, hesitant. Owen. He stepped beside our table, hands in the pockets of a windbreaker he hadn't taken off. Sorry I'm late, he said, then nodded to Claire. Did you get the confirmation? Claire turned a page in her binder. I did. The bank's compliance officer froze the transaction this morning. Julian attempted to move $820,000 into a holding account under a company name. The EIN was fake. It's flagged. Funds are locked. Julian's chair scraped back slightly. Owen looked at him. You really thought Mom would sign off on her whole life? The land, the cattle, the damn hay shed? His voice was soft, but the weight behind it wasn't. Julian stood now. You brought him into this too? God, Mom, this is sick. I was trying to help you. You're not young anymore. You're not thinking straight. You need someone to manage things. That's what the trust is for, I interrupted. He stared at me like I'd become someone else. Maybe I had. You really think this is justice? He asked, arms out. Dragging your own son into some legal ambush over a piece of dirt and memories? It's not dirt, I said, rising from my chair. It's 40 years of sweat and sacrifice. And you didn't just try to steal land. You tried to erase me. His mouth opened again, but I lifted a hand. You told a stranger, pretending to be one, that I wouldn't notice, that I'd fade quietly. That's not just theft, Julian. That's contempt. And now, it's also evidence. For a moment, he looked like the boy I once knew. Stunned, cornered, eyes wide like he'd fallen off a swing and couldn't breathe. But only for a moment. Claire, I said without turning, you have everything? We do, she replied. This folder will go to the DA's office, the rest to the financial crimes unit. Julian slumped back into his seat. The wine he once toasted with now stood untouched. No celebration anymore, only consequences. He glanced up at me, voice hoarse. So, what happens to me now? I didn't answer immediately. I looked to Claire, then to Owen. And finally back to my son, The one I raised. The one I had to protect myself from. Tomorrow, I said quietly, the sun comes up, and for once, you'll get to feel what it's like to live in someone else's shadow. He didn't reply. As I gathered my purse, I felt the weight of 40 seasons, hay cuttings, winter feeds, birthings, burials, not crushing me, but settling behind me like a wall no one could push through again. We walked out into the Texas night. Warm air, open sky, no apology following behind us. At dawn, I watched from the kitchen window as Julian stood by the barn, arms crossed, boots too clean for the dirt he was about to earn. The morning mist hadn't yet burned off, but sweat was already blooming at his collar. He shifted his weight foot to foot, trying to look like he belonged, but the stiffness in his stance gave him away. Even the dogs knew he was out of rhythm. Neither of them went to greet him. The brass key glinted on the wall behind me, just above the ledger shelf. That same key had once been in his pocket, back when he thought paperwork made him king. Now it was back where it belonged, cool and untouchable, a symbol he'd never reclaim. He'd signed the contract yesterday in Claire's office, sitting straighter than usual, trying to look like a man doing something noble. Claire had gone through every clause, every consequence. You agree to 6 months of unpaid labor as restitution. You agree to supervised compliance. You understand that violation voids all leniency. Julian nodded after each line, jaw set, eyes cast somewhere between the desk and the door. He didn't ask for a copy. Claire slid the original into her blue binder, labeled it Restitution Carter, and stood. Back at the ranch, the work began. I didn't coddle him. No one did. By 8:30, he was unloading feed sacks from the truck bed, his hands already red and slick. The other ranch hands watched, arms crossed, leaning against fence posts like men appraising a colt that might bolt. Hector, who'd been with us since '98, gave no more than a grunt. Julian hoisted a bag wrong, stumbled, and the powdered dust exploded across his shirt like a silent judgment. I didn't intervene. I just noted the ledger needed updating and returned to the kitchen. Inside, the fridge hummed against the silence. I laid out the water bills, fencing invoices, and seed receipts. The table looked like it always had, functional, stained by decades of coffee rings and pencil marks, but now it held new weight. It was the war room. I balanced the checkbook, recalculated our feed schedule, and emailed Claire the first daily report. Noon came heavy. Julian walked with a limp by then, favoring a blistered heel, shirt darkened at the chest and back. He didn't speak much, just nodded to Hector's directions and kept moving. Pride, it turned out, could carry more than muscle. Around 4, I brought out 2 pitchers of water, set them on the shaded bench by the side barn, and walked away. It wasn't kindness, it was protocol. He drank half the pitcher without pause, wiped his mouth with the back of his wrist, then returned to the hay bales. I caught the apology later. It was near sundown. I was walking to the pump house when I heard it. Julian's voice, lower than usual. I snapped at you earlier, he said. That was on me. Hector didn't respond right away. Then I heard a grunt, maybe approval. Ranch forgiveness is like that, granted in silence, measured by effort. That evening, I watched the sun fold itself into the hill line from the porch swing. The air smelled of hay and old pine. Julian limped toward the bunkhouse, a bundle of aches and stubbornness, but something in his gait had changed. He wasn't dragging anymore. That night, I sat at the kitchen table again, ledgers open, a pencil tapping absently in my hand. The ceiling fan spun lazy circles, and outside, cicadas sang their dry summer songs. The ranch had a rhythm, one built long before Julian's brief conquest, and it had never broken for him. He was the one who had to bend. I flipped through the latest entries. Grain prices up, diesel stable, one fence repair overdue. Numbers soothed me. They didn't lie, didn't flatter, didn't betray. They just added up, or they didn't. There was a sound outside, not the porch creaking under the wind or the screen door shifting in its frame. This was quieter, intentional. I turned off the fan and listened. Julian was on the bunkhouse porch. I could see his silhouette through the screen, hunched forward, elbows on knees, hands steepled in front of him. He thought no one could hear. Maybe he thought no one should. "I won't fail this time," he whispered. 4 words, not loud, not performative, just scraped out like something scabbed and half-healed. I didn't say anything, didn't move, just watched him sit there. Same man who'd once forged my name, tried to gut my legacy, now cradling his own shame like a splinter he couldn't yet remove. That brass key still hung on the kitchen wall, catching the dim light. Still mine. And tomorrow, we'd start again, at dawn, with dirt and sweat and choices. By autumn, Julian's hands looked nothing like the ones that used to swipe across a tablet or hover over a conference call mute button. They were browned, split, and thick, real rancher's hands. One afternoon, I watched him crack open a pecan with his palm against the edge of the post. No flinch, no blood. Just a clean break. The harvest had a way of revealing who could endure and who merely observed. Cicadas gave way to dry wind. The mornings were sharp, the afternoons dry, and the sweat stayed in your shirt long after the work was done. Julian didn't whine anymore. That was something. Emma's school project still hung crooked on the fridge. A cardboard tree labeled Family Heritage, branches stretching with names like Great-Grandpa Joe, Rancher, and Nana Betty, Seamstress. Julian's name was taped on with hesitation, scrawled in faint pencil. I hadn't dared ask if she added him before or after everything fell apart. One evening, Julian came in later than usual, his boots kicking mud clumps onto the welcome mat. He saw the project and paused. Emma was across the room reading, one leg tucked under her, the other bouncing. She noticed his stare. "Do I get an update?" she asked, voice half joking, half not. "Still under villainous son or moving toward family again?" He didn't smile. "Depends who's voting." She closed her book. "You already know what you did was wrong. Why'd you do it anyway?" He opened his mouth, closed it, rubbed the back of his neck with the same hand that once signed forged deeds. "I thought I was owed more," he said finally. Emma tilted her head. "Because you're the oldest?" "Because I thought I knew better, and I didn't." That was the end of it. She went back to her book. He stood a moment longer, then disappeared down the hall. The next day, Claire called. Her voice was brisk, measured as always. "Restitution update," she said. "We've recovered $550,000. Partial transfer reversed. Bank flagged the wire under internal fraud protocols. Could take another month for full wrap-up." I thanked her, then asked what I really wanted to know. "Does he know?" "He will. But I think it might mean more coming from you." That weekend, the county fair bloomed like a late sunflower. Funnel cake stands, bluegrass bands, and kids with sticky fingers and plastic swords. Owen drove us in, me, Emma, and Julian, though Julian rode in silence most of the way, eyes on the landscape. He didn't bolt ahead like he used to. No charming neighbor waves, no puffed-up stories about when we owned the top herd in the county. Instead, he stayed a step behind me, carrying Emma's extra jacket, asking if I wanted water, actually listening when I said I didn't. I caught glimpses, small things. He handed an extra $1 to a teenage vendor short on change. Led a child ahead of him in line for kettle corn. Nodded quietly to the 4-H kid who took home the blue ribbon for dairy calf instead of pretending he could have done better. Evening light pooled amber across the midway. We walked beneath the Ferris wheel, its lights blinking into the dusk. Emma tugged at my sleeve. "Can we get ice cream?" she asked. "Sure," I said. Then without turning, I added, "Julian, take her." He didn't hesitate, just said, "Of course," and walked beside her. She handed him her last few dollars without a second thought. That night, after the fair, after Emma had fallen asleep in Owen's truck, Julian and I stayed behind to fix a section of fence sagging near the pecan grove. He carried the boards without complaint, hammered nails without wasting any, and then, in the quiet between swings, he said, "I was never your partner, you know." I glanced over. "No?" He shook his head. "You built this place. I showed up late and thought I deserved half just because I shared your last name." His voice was calm, not pitiful, just honest. "I wasn't your legacy," he added. "I was your burden." I let that sit in the night air. The wind carried pecan dust and the soft rustle of distant cattle. We worked a while longer in silence, side by side, wood against wood, until the last board held steady. He leaned the hammer against the post. "Mom," he said softly, and I knew this wasn't about the fence anymore. "Yeah? Will I ever be more than your employee again?" I didn't answer yet. I wasn't ready, but I didn't walk away either. The next morning, I found Julian already up, standing by the barn with a cracked coffee mug in hand. He didn't speak right away, just nodded toward the ledger I'd brought out onto the porch table with my own coffee. "You still keep the numbers by hand?" he asked. "Some things deserve paper," I said. "Can't delete a margin note in ink." He smiled at that, almost boyishly, then asked, "How bad were the numbers?" After what I did. I slid the book his way. "Bad, but not unrecoverable." He flipped a few pages, pausing at the rows of hay costs, livestock vaccinations, and Claire's name scribbled next to several restored accounts. There was a note in the margin. "Recovered $550K, possible settlement mid-November." He didn't read aloud, but I saw his jaw tighten. "I didn't just steal money," he murmured. "I stole your sleep, your trust." I didn't contradict him. He wasn't wrong. That afternoon, Emma brought home a new addition to her school project, a faded photo I hadn't seen in years. It showed Julian, maybe 11, trying to lasso a wooden fence post, grinning wide with 2 front teeth missing. She'd taped it under the legacy branch. Julian saw it while grabbing water from the fridge. "Where'd you get that?" "Dad sent it," she said. "Said it was one of the good days." Julian looked at the picture a long time. It was. Later, Owen came by. He watched Julian repairing the hitch on the flatbed and offered a nod of approval. No words. Just that one gesture. I couldn't remember the last time they'd acknowledged each other without tension behind every syllable. That night, Emma set the table while I stirred stew on the stove. Julian came in from the yard, dirt smudged across his cheek, holding 2 squash he'd pulled from the back garden. "Dinner contribution," he said, offering them like a peace treaty. I took them wordlessly, sliced, rinsed, and dropped them in the pot. At the table, conversation turned to the fair, then school, then quietly, carefully, to what was next. Julian didn't dominate the talk, didn't make promises he couldn't keep. After Emma had gone to bed, he lingered behind, gathering plates. "I'm not asking for the ranch," he said softly, rinsing one. "Or forgiveness." I raised an eyebrow. "I just want a place in the story that's not written in pencil." He dried his hands, looked once more at the project taped to the fridge, and left the room. I stood in the quiet kitchen for a while after. The pot still warm on the stove, the brass key gleaming faintly in the hallway light, and Emma's project watching me from the fridge like a silent verdict. That night, I wrote a new note in the ledger's back page. "Debt repaid is not the same as trust earned, but it's a beginning. I don't know if he'll ever be more than an employee here. Maybe he'll always be a man trying to undo a signature forged too deep. But in that quiet, in that fence post and photo and squash, I saw something take root again. And sometimes, the slowest seeds make the strongest trees. The sun hovered low, brushing gold over the Carter fields as Julian's shadow stretched long across the soil he'd once tried to claim through ink and arrogance. From the porch, I watched him toss a bundle of fencing tools into the flatbed, the muscles in his arms no longer from gym memberships but months of real labor. He didn't see me. Or maybe he did and chose not to wave, understanding now that some gestures have to be earned. Inside, the red dress from Summit Grill still hung in the hall closet, sheathed in plastic, like a retired uniform. I ran a hand along its sleeve as I passed, but I didn't wear it tonight. Closure didn't need armor. Claire's office was cooler than I remembered. Or maybe I was just more composed now. She greeted us with a nod, her legal pad already open, a highlighter tucked behind one ear. "Well," she said, clicking her pen, "let's review." Julian sat beside me, posture straight, eyes clear. His shirt, though clean, bore faint sun stains near the collar, a mark of a year's worth of sunrise chores and mid-afternoon fence repairs. No more cologne, no pressed cuffs. Claire's tone remained even. "You've completed 1,092 hours of unsalaried labor, overseen by both me and Margaret. You've returned $812,400, including the full proceeds from the Montenegro transfer. No further breaches. No late reports. No contact with fraudulent buyers." Julian exhaled, the kind of breath someone releases when they've held it for 12 months. "Any questions before we finalize the terms of transition?" Claire asked, glancing between us. Julian's voice was quieter than I expected. "Just one." Claire waited. "I know what I did and what I lost. I just want to say—" He looked at me. "I found something worth more." I didn't respond. Not then. Back at the ranch that evening, we set the dinner table outside. Owen had grilled chicken, Emma had baked cornbread, and someone, likely Julian, had folded the napkins into triangles too precise for chance. Cicadas buzzed in the background, harmonizing with the laughter I never thought I'd hear again. Emma elbowed Julian. "Nice farmer's tan." He smirked, lifting his sleeve to show the stark line. "Earned it." Owen raised his glass. To earning it. I didn't toast, but I didn't correct him either. After dinner, we sat under the porch light, reviewing the final paperwork. I slid the amended contract toward Julian. His hand hovered before he took the pen. "You'll be listed as junior partner," I said. 3-year probation. No ownership changes without dual signature. No guarantees of inheritance. Julian didn't flinch. "That's more than fair." I nodded once. This doesn't erase what happened. I know, but it's a start. When our hands met in a handshake, I felt the calluses in his palm. Real ones. Earned. A single tear slid down his cheek. He didn't brush it away. "This time," he said, voice catching, "I'll earn it every day." We didn't hug. That wasn't us. Not yet. But when he stood to leave, Owen clapped him on the shoulder. A brother's acknowledgement. Emma leaned her head briefly on his arm. That night, I watched from the upstairs window as Julian walked out to the gate. The brass key, the one that once opened doors he tried to steal, now turned with quiet acceptance. He stepped through not as a savior or a son begging for redemption, but as a man willing to prove himself again. Maybe tomorrow he'd fail. Maybe next week he'd forget to oil the hinges or undercut a hay bale. But tonight, he'd done something rare. He'd chosen to come back, not for power, not for apology, but for process. And sometimes that's how rebuilding begins. Not with grand gestures, but with a key turning quietly in the lock. He turned the key in the ranch gate like it was the first time, not with ownership, but with understanding. I watched from the porch, not with suspicion, but with something softer, hope wrapped in caution. Sometimes, the ones who fail us are also the ones who try the hardest to return. Love doesn't erase the damage, but it gives us the strength to rebuild with boundaries. In families, redemption isn't a gift. It's a daily decision, earned one moment at a time. If this story reminded you of someone you've forgiven, or someone you're still waiting on, I'd be honored to hear it. Your story matters too.